Big Shaq learns his brother can't pay rent. But what he does next, no one sees coming. No cameras, no headlines, just a silent move that sets off a storm across the city. Behind one quiet decision hides a history of pain, a bond long buried, and a plan that rewrites everything. This isn't just about rent, it's about redemption, resistance, and reclaiming what was lost. What Big Shaq builds in secret becomes a movement that millions never expected. And it all starts with one rusted door, one broken promise, and one man who refuses to walk away. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun had not yet climbed high when Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal stepped onto the cracked concrete sidewalk of Cedar Grove, Florida. His early morning footsteps echoed down the narrow street, footprints in a neighborhood that didn't know it had a hero. His frame, impossibly tall and wide even in old age, commanded attention, and yet Shaq moved with a quiet purpose, carefully measured, as if not to disturb the serenity of a world that now prized calm over chaos. He smoked a menthol cigarette between his lips, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals that matched the swaying cypress branches overhead. Despite his presence, the street felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. On this particular day, Shaq wore his usual attire, a faded navy windbreaker, dark slacks, and sneakers that had seen better days. There was no gold chain, no loud jersey, no hint of the basketball legend he once was. The locals greeted him, as they always did, a nod, a muffled "Good morning, Big Shaq." Before returning to their routines, he acknowledged each with a gentle smile, never stopping to chat for long. His silence held the same weight as his voice, the calm before storms that no one could see coming. He paused at the edge of the community garden just past Mrs. Eldridge's porch. Tomato vines spilled over, raised beds. Chickens wandered between beds, pecking at stray seeds. Shaq climbed onto a low wooden bench and sat down. He watched the morning ritual of people planting, watering, caring. The world seemed to be mending itself right here in small acts. He took a long drag of his cigarette and closed his eyes. His chest expanded with the Florida humidity. Memories awakened. He reminded himself again why this place meant so much. Cedar Grove had become his refuge, a town that needed him quietly without spectacle. A soft rustling drew his attention. A group of children scurried past, racing to school. Their backpacks bounced violently against their backs, while they shrieked with youthful excitement. Shaq's eyes softened. Each face reminded him of his daughters. He thought of Mira O'Neal, now 15, talented beyond words, fierce beyond measure. He loved her with an intensity that terrified him. In his deepest moments of reflection, he wondered what kind of father he would have been without this life, without Cedar Grove's lessons of humility. He grounded himself in the laughter of the kids, drawing strength from their joy. Shaq dropped the cigarette carefully into a metal ashtray mounted on the bench and stood. He followed the cracked sidewalk to the old bank building on Maple Street. No frills, no lines of people waiting at glass doors. Just one battered sign that read Sunrise Loans. He unlocked the front door with a heavy metal key and stepped inside. The lobby glowed pale with fluorescent lights and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He nodded to the elderly woman behind the counter, Mrs. Montgomery. Their exchange never involved words. They had known each other for years, exchanged silent trust instead of idle chatter. He crossed to desk 3. A white man with a pinched face sat behind a stack of papers, eyes flicking up as Shaq settled into the chair opposite. The man swallowed, cleared his throat, leaned forward. Shaq cleared his throat too. Their ritual began. The clerk slid a crumpled folder across the desk. Shaq lifted it with a single finger, skimmed the front cover, then wordlessly took out a check from the inner breast pocket of his windbreaker. He signed it. The paper passed back across. The clerk's cheeks flushed, eyes darting to confirm the numbers. A 6-figure amount. He nodded, but didn't speak. Shaq stood, left the room, and locked the door behind him. Outside, his heart thundered. He clenched his fists to steady himself. No one knew why he came here so often. He refused to say. Not asking questions kept him safe from the weight of unintended consequences. Occasionally, he wondered if anonymity still existed in an age of cameras and headlines. But Cedar Grove's inhabitants gave him quiet understanding. They didn't care that a legend lived among them. They only cared what he meant to them. And so he let them believe he was just a friendly giant who smiled and helped out. Once a week, same time, same place. Sunrise Loans was his penance, his secret. Every time he signed the same folder, same name, same number, he felt the weight of unsaid promises. He wondered about time. Would this ever end? Could goodwill persist? Could debts really disappear when money appeared? He doubted that. Yet he couldn't stop himself. A life of success without responsibility felt hollow, the same way fame had done after he walked away from basketball. Every visit reminded him that redemption wasn't linear. It went back down that skinny bank staircase, into dark cubicles. He left the building and stepped into open sunlight, squinting. A hot breeze ruffled his clothes. The late morning heat was developing. Time moved forward in this way. Life grew warmer. Days stretched. Everyone tried to outrun yesterday. Shaq inhaled deep. You can't outrun everything. Sometimes you have to face what you owed, even if you didn't borrow. A beat later, his phone buzzed. He unlocked it to see a text from Shawnee. Pick up Miara at Art's workshop. Don't be late. His face relaxed. He tapped a message back. We'll be there in 20. He slipped the phone into his pocket and headed toward his car. His mind raced in fragments. Debt, daughter, legacy, secrets, forgiveness. A pattern emerged, threads of a tapestry he refused to name. As he turned the corner near the grocery store, he spotted a man and woman arguing near a trash bin. The man was tall, nerves fraying. The woman wore a name tag. Grace. Volunteer. Shaq stopped but didn't approach. He kept walking. There was no need, no space. Community thrived on responsibility, not interference. Yet with each step he felt the tension linger. He thought of his daughter and his wife, Shawnee Henderson, steadfast in their love but always cautious about his secret. He thought of Lucille O'Neal, his mother, proud and protective, who had taught him that power carried a cost. You paid back the world, she had said, so the world didn't owe you. He reached the blue Honda, parked under a shady oak. As he climbed in, he stared at the steering wheel. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He then started the engine. The drive to the arts center took him past small homes and palm trees, the road shimmering with heat. He remembered his first time on this street, years ago, when fame still powered him. He drove faster then, windows down, radio blasting. Today was different. He now appreciated the uncomplicated rhythm of routine and sun-baked sidewalks. He circled the arts center. Kids were painting metal sculptures under colorful tents. Parents lounged in lawn chairs, chatting. He pulled in and shut down the engine, stepping out into applause as a violin solo ended. Mirar emerged holding a large canvas painted in bold strokes of purple and green. She sprinted toward him. She looked like him in stature but different in glow, youth and promise lighting her face. She threw her arms around him. He hugged her tight until she giggled and broke away, raising the canvas for him to see. He knelt down to admire it, noticing details, patterns, textures, the way light played across colors. He nodded, impressed. She beamed. She asked about breakfast. He pointed toward a pancake stand. They walked side by side, her canvas tucked under her arm. He held her small hand in his large one, thinking of how fragile hope could be, and how necessity lurked behind compassion. They bought 2 plates of pancakes. Miara giggled about syrup running down their fingers. Her smile made all debts worth paying. He felt eyes watching him. A few neighbors gave polite waves. But someone lingered, a man in a dark suit by the entrance, cell phone to ear, eyes tracking Shaq and his daughter. Shaq noticed it but said nothing. They walked together back toward the car, pancakes in hand, laughter in air. He decided not to mention the suited man. Some burdens traveled alone. Still, the feeling of being watched settled in his chest. They returned home without incident. In the driveway, Shawnee stepped out with a bouquet of jasmine. She hugged them both. Mira wrapped her arms around her mother. Before handing her the painting, Shawnee studied it with pride. It's beautiful, she whispered. Shawnee told Mira about an art auction in Orlando the next week. Mira gasped and hugged them both again. Inside, Shaq watched his family move around their modest kitchen. Shade from porches flitted across wooden floors. The world outside carried on. Traffic, birds, distant sirens, but here, a warm hum of domestic love filled the air. Shani handed him a glass of water. He accepted it with a grateful smile. She didn't ask where he'd been. That was enough. Shaq sat by the window, water in hand, staring at the front yard where dandelions trembled in the breeze. He thought of Sunrise Loans, of the cases he paid, of a stranger whose life he was crafting, piece by piece. But he knew more days awaited, more checks to sign. He didn't want praise. He only wanted to make what was wrong feel right. At least some of the time. He sipped water, and the sun slid slowly overhead. He laced his fingers, spread them on the tabletop. He knew questions would come. One day, Miara would ask why he didn't just give money to her school, or that food bank. She'd see the contrast between public good and private redemption. She'd sense the unease beneath his charity. When that day came, he promised himself to explain, to tell her that some debts aren't between banks and borrowers. They're owed to history, memory, conscience. Shawnee sat beside him and rested her hand on his. Her touch was reassurance, a line between doubt and serenity. Shaq leaned his head on her shoulder and exhaled. The world beyond would keep unfolding cases, dangers, secrets. But for now, this was enough. For now, a father, a husband, a man who once towered over arenas, stood in a Florida home, with nothing but love to bear. In that quiet moment, Shaq acknowledged a truth. Power meant nothing without purpose. He closed his eyes, held his family close, and let the afternoon sun seep in. It warmed the room, chased shadows from corners. It whispered that tomorrow would come. And with it, more mysteries, more checks to sign, more hidden debts to pay, silent debts belonging to unseen people in unseen offices. And Shaq would rise again, walk away from applause, and do what he believed was right. No headlines, no cameras, just quiet steps down cracked sidewalks, toward a future he hoped would one day be debt-free for everyone. It was nearing the end of the week when Shaq stepped into Sunrise Loans again. The air was heavier this time, less stale, more tense. The lobby was dimmer than usual, the windows coated with a fine layer of dust that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The receptionist didn't greet him. She was on the phone, her voice low and clipped. He didn't wait for permission. He knew where he was going. Inside, the usual clerk wasn't alone. Another man, unfamiliar and shifty-eyed, was reviewing a box of files, his fingers moving too fast, too nervous, like someone trying to hide something before it was seen. When Shaq entered, the man's hands froze mid-motion. The room fell silent. The air thickened. Without saying a word, the new man slipped a folder from the top of the box and handed it over. Shaq took the folder, opened it with deliberate calm, and began to read. The contents were typed, stapled and dog-eared, dated and redacted, in ways that felt hastily done. His eyes moved down the page, and then stopped. Delaney Cross. The name meant nothing at first, but the numbers did. A debt of $18,700. Originally closed 3 years ago, now reopened due to technical oversight. The phrase felt off. The agency rarely reopened closed cases. If anything, they tried to erase past records, not drag them forward. Why this one? As he turned the pages, details emerged. Delaney had once owned a wellness store in Georgia. Clean record, filed bankruptcy once, after a break-in, paid her dues. No legal disputes since. The new debt was attributed to a missed penalty clause in an old contract. It didn't fit. Shaq's instincts flared. This wasn't a missed payment. This was a targeted maneuver. She was being punished, not charged. He closed the folder, stared at the clerk. "This from corporate?" he asked flatly. The clerk nodded once, but didn't meet his eyes. Shaq didn't press him further. Instead, he pulled out his checkbook, wrote the number, signed it, and handed it over. "Erase it. Permanently." The clerk took it without a word. Shaq left the room slowly, his mind unraveling thoughts faster than he could process them. There was something about Delaney's file. The clean history, the abrupt reopening, the absence of any recent contact. It didn't feel random. It felt like bait, but bait for what? That evening, he returned home later than usual. The sky was a burnt orange canvas, the sun sliding behind the palm trees. Shawnee was in the kitchen, Manara finishing up a sketch on the porch. Shaq kissed them both, muttered something about being tired, and retreated to the study. He needed space. At his desk, he opened his old leather notebook, flipped to a blank page, and began writing names. Not just Delaney's, but others he remembered from over the years. People whose debt he had cleared quietly. He started to notice a pattern. Every so often, a case came through with too much polish, like someone wanted to make it look legitimate. Those were the ones that stuck with him. They weren't asking for help. They were being used. Delaney's name stayed at the top of the list. He turned to his laptop, typed her name into the browser. No social media, no recent news. Just a few business listings for her now-closed wellness store. He dug deeper, cross-referencing databases he had access to through his nonprofit's legal contacts. Eventually, he found an address in Winter Haven, Florida. A P.O. box. No residence. No phone. It was the first time he'd seen a debt profile so meticulously erased from current public view. Almost like she didn't exist anymore. He leaned back, hands behind his head. His eyes were heavy, but his gut churned. This wasn't about the money. It was about the silence. She had been pushed out of something, and someone didn't want her found. The next morning, Shaq drove to Sunrise Loans again. This time, he asked for the full digital record on Delaney's account. The clerk hesitated, then unlocked the file on a grimy old desktop. Shaq leaned in. The data trail was sparse. No new address updates, but there was a note in the activity log. Attempted contact, denied. No detail, no date. He tapped the screen. Who tried to contact her? The clerk's face paled. Out-of-state firm, he said. Hired contractors. Debt retrieval. Shaq stared at him hard. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. They don't usually. It's not us. We just log the file. Sometimes they look. It's just procedure. Procedure, Shaq repeated, then stepped away from the desk. His voice didn't rise, but his disappointment was a quiet storm. You log people. You don't see them. He walked out. He took the rest of the day to drive to Winter Haven. The town was small, sleepy, surrounded by lakes and tree-lined roads. He stopped at the post office, flashed a business card from one of his nonprofits, and asked about P.O. Box 341. The clerk told him the box hadn't been opened in weeks. Mail was stacking. She wasn't coming back. Shaq stepped outside and sat on a bench near the sidewalk. The town was still, warm, with distant sounds of lawnmowers and birds. He took out his notebook again. This time, he flipped back 3 years, to the date the debt was supposedly closed. He cross-referenced it with his own journal entry from that week. He had written one sentence. Paid off a file with no owner. That was Delaney. She had appeared before, but without a name. That night he sat at the end of his bed, staring out at the dark. Shawnee had gone to sleep early. Mara had her headphones in, humming to music. He held the file in his lap. Something about it wouldn't let him go. He thought about how many times he'd paid off silent stories, how often he'd told himself he didn't need to know the details. He just wanted to help. But this time it felt different. This time the silence wasn't helpless. It was hiding. He returned to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink. The house creaked slightly in the night air. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number. One text. You shouldn't have done that. No sender. No context. But he knew. The debt. Delaney. He stared at the message until it vanished from the screen. His fingers clenched. The water glass trembled, and he set it down slowly. The next morning, he called a friend from his playing days, now a private investigator in Tallahassee. He gave him Delaney's name, told him to find out if she had a lawyer, a case, anything sealed or recent. The friend promised to run it quietly. Hours later, the call came. She testified in a whistleblower case against a chemical manufacturer in Georgia. The PI said, "Big deal. Civil case got buried, but she was the lead voice. No one's heard from her since. Defense settled quietly. No press. But there were threats after. Real ones." Shaq sat down on the curb outside the Arts Center. Phone pressed tight to his ear. Threats from who? People connected to the company. Not directly, but let's just say the debt file might have been leverage. They wanted her silent. You paying it? That complicates things. Makes her free. Shaq rubbed his face. So now they're watching me? Maybe. Depends what they think you know. Shaq hung up. He stared at the street for a long time. Noara was inside with her art teacher. Shawnee would be home soon. He stood, walked toward the parking lot. In the distance he saw a black car parked under a tree. Dark windows. Engine running. The same one from the pancake stand, 2 days ago. He got in his car, locked the doors, and drove off slowly. At the next light he whispered to himself, "Who are you, Delaney?" Back home he pulled the file from the drawer once more. He examined the only photo inside, a grainy DMV picture, half-lit. Her face was tired, determined, eyes like someone who had learned to run before learning to ask for help. He traced her name with his finger. Something told him this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Sunday morning in Cedar Grove carried a particular hush, gentle, reverent, tinged with secret weight. The small brick church on Elm Street opened its doors before dawn for morning mass, its stained glass windows catching first light. Parishioners moved in slowly, greeting one another with soft nods and hushed hellos. Shawnee and Mira had planned to join that morning, but Shaq chose else. He stood across the street in his car, watching as Delaney Cross approached the church entrance. She moved in silence, head bowed, clutching a worn coat against the crisp breeze. Inside, whispers started like ripples in a pond. Mrs. Foster, seated in the third pew, noticed Delaney's emotion before the choir sang a single hymn. She nudged the man next to her and nodded toward the newcomer. The man, Mr. Benson, stared down his hymnal floorward, eyes flicking up to follow Delaney's path to an empty seat near the back. The murmur spread quickly, anonymity lost the instant someone new catches attention in a tightly woven community. Delaney knelt, crossing herself gently, her lips quivering, as she fought tears. She rocked slightly, her hands clasped for prayer. To an outsider, it looked like devotion. But to those who knew her story, that her debt had vanished overnight, it looked more like raw relief laced with fear. Everyone had heard. Someone had probably paid. A miracle? A threat? The gossip grew louder in the pews, under hushed breath. Shaq watched from his car with binoculars, unobtrusively aimed. He spotted two men near the churchyard, lean suits, postured too deliberately for Sunday worship. He watched them exchange a folded note. His heart thumped. The two men parted ways, one slipping toward the church-side door, the other toward the main entrance. It felt like a stage play rehearsed too many times, movements measured, minutes calculated. Delaney rose when Mass ended. Stepping out into the nave's pale light, she moved through the departing congregation like a ghost, avoiding smiles, ignoring stares. Shaq followed at a distance, parking blocks away so as not to draw attention. The men in suits fell in behind her, too close, almost synchronized. She slipped down a side street, and the men hesitated before pursuing. Shaq pressed his hand to the steering wheel. He wanted to intervene, but their presence said more than any words. This was bigger than him. Back inside the church, the whispers turned to conversation. "She's been crying since she sat down," Mrs. Foster told her daughter, soft enough only she could hear. She paused by the coat rack. "I saw those men following her." The daughter's eyebrows lifted. "What men, Mama?" "Two strangers," she whispered. In dark ties, they watched her from the moment she walked in. Word spread to the pastor, Father Martin, who glanced through the glass doors and saw Delaney emerge alone. He recognized her from community center gatherings, months earlier. He knew little of her story, just that she brought old wounds disguised in volunteer hours. Now people asked questions. Who paid her debt? And why was she scared? The church office buzzed with phone calls. "Is that who I think it is? And I heard the file was six-figure debt. Just gone." Inside the sanctuary, wooden pews creaked as people departed. The air smelled of incense and nervous tension. Parishioners moved closer, sensing something unsaid passing between them like candlelight. Shaq trailed Delaney to a quiet park bench beneath magnolia trees, near the church. He watched as she slid onto the bench, wringing her hands. His breath caught. She looked so small, so vulnerable. His instincts urged him forward, to confront the men in suits, to rip the worry from her hands. But he forced himself to wait, to understand. Delaney stared at the ground, fingers stained with ink from frantic note writing. She exhaled in sharp bursts, like a runner catching breath after a sprint. Those men emerged across the lawn, one standing beneath the tree's shadow, the other pacing near the street. They watched her. She flinched with each slow step they took. She pressed her forehead into her palms, as if drowning in a sea of dread. Shaq's phone vibrated. A text from his PI friend. "They're closing in. He thinks risk is rising." 2 words, risk rising. He knew then that Delaney's silence was not just fear. It was strategy. A shield. She was rehearsing calm, but her eyes betrayed her. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. He didn't want to startle her. The moment she looked up, he offered his presence, not his identity. "May I sit?" he asked quietly. She nodded without speaking, the tension in her shoulders loosening just enough for him to slip in beside her. They sat in silence for a heartbeat. He didn't introduce himself. There was no need. He handed her a folded paper, a note with meeting details. Time, place, safe house. Just a line. I'm watching. Be brave. She stared at it. Her lips trembled. She looked at him. Then away, afraid a glance might reveal too much. But she didn't flee. She didn't erase the note. She let it rest in her hand. He knew then that his act mattered. The men in suits moved off, patrol-like, but did not approach. It was an unspoken understanding. This wasn't their moment. This phase wasn't yet theirs. Shaq sat calmly beside her, radiating calm. He didn't move to block the men. He sat. He waited. He protected quietly, invisibly. The walk back to church found them passing under low branches thick with blooms. Petals fluttered to the ground like spilled promises. She walked beside him, shoulders hunched, expression unreadable. He said nothing. She didn't either. Their silence spoke volumes. Inside, Father Martin noticed them return together, exchanging no words. Parishioners frowned, watchers whispered. But the church's routine returned. Communion lines formed, hymns were sung. The pairs wove through each other. The moment passed. After service concluded, Shawnee found him near the entrance. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, watching Delaney cross the courtyard behind them. "I saw her," he said low. Shawnee followed his gaze. Her face tightened. "I'll keep an eye." Shawnee's words weren't a question, they were a promise. That afternoon, headlines didn't carry local news. Cedar Grove Gazette held stories of town fairs, lost pets, garage sales, not church mysteries. But talk at dinner tables hummed. What happened to her? Did someone pay her debt? Is she safe? Each rumor carried a grain of truth, warped by distance and fear. Shaq returned to Sunrise Loans. After dark. He slipped inside against the guard's old routine. He retrieved Delaney's folder from a locked drawer. He flipped through it to find a new note in handwriting different from the typed threats. An apology. No signature, just sorry, scrawled across ledger margins. He realized someone inside the agency had a change of heart. Or fear. Or both. But what frightened him most was the uncertainty. Was the threat still active? Was someone inside playing both sides? Was the legacy of his check enough to stave off danger? Delaney didn't call that evening. Messages went unanswered. She didn't reply to Shawnee's text checking in. A chill set in Shaq's chest. Something had shifted. This wasn't hospice for debt. This was hide or run. And run. She would if the world left her no choice. He fell into his desk chair at midnight, the folder open. His phone glowed with Delaney's text. "I'll meet you." Beneath it, shadows from his shade flickered across the page. He traced the letters. His finger paused over meat. He nodded to the darkness. He was ready to enter her secret, walk beside her through danger's door, not as a basketball legend, but as a protector who understood hidden debts, silent debts, and now this whispering debt of fear. He closed the ledger. Tomorrow he'd meet her. In the pews, in the park, in front of everyone, or no one, whatever peace she let breathe. The uncertainty burned, but so did his purpose. He would follow whispers through the church pew and beyond, until her silence spoke the truth. And in the morning Cedar Grove would notice two figures meet under whispered breath, and wonder what salvation looked like when offered by that gentle giant in the shadows. It began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind that rolls in without warning in Central Florida, washing over the town like a tide of forgotten memories. The downpour wasn't loud, just steady, persistent, the kind that seeped into your bones if you stood too long by a window, which Shaq did, arms crossed over his chest, watching the water chase itself down the pane. Inside his study the room was still. The light was low, and the only sound came from the tick of a vintage clock on the shelf, a gift from his mother when he moved into the house. He hadn't planned to write anything. He rarely did anymore. Words came easier through actions for him, through signed checks, donated resources, surprise gestures no one saw coming. But something about the day had stirred an ache in him, an unsettled guilt like a low hum beneath the skin. It had been gnawing at him since Delaney Cross's name appeared in that ledger. Since that quiet moment outside the church when she looked up at him like she knew he carried something more than kindness, something unfinished. He sat at the desk and opened the drawer with the old leather notebook. Beneath it was a stack of unlined paper, the kind he hadn't touched in years. He took one page, uncapped a pen, and began to write without thinking, words pouring out in tight looping cursive, addressed to someone he hadn't spoken to since the funeral. "Dad," he began. "It's strange how a man can stand in the world's spotlight and still feel invisible where it counts. I've signed more basketballs than I can count, raised millions, built courts in neighborhoods where shoes were more dream than reality. But today, I feel like I've done nothing at all. He paused, staring at the words. He hadn't meant to confess anything. He hadn't known there was something to confess until the pen moved on its own. There's a woman, her name's Delaney Cross. You wouldn't know her. I didn't either. Not really. Just a file. A number. A case that smelled like injustice the minute it hit my hands. I paid it. Quietly. Like always. But something didn't sit right afterward. Like it wasn't just her debt I was trying to erase. Maybe it's what you used to say, that some wrongs don't die. They just change their name. I think this one changed its face too. I think I'm starting to see mine in it. The rain outside softened. It moved in waves now. Gentle taps on the roof. Shaq leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the framed photo on the bookshelf. Him and his dad back in Newark, both in matching jackets, standing on a cracked sidewalk outside their old apartment. His father's hand rested firm on his shoulder, guiding, grounding. Even in stillness, the photo held weight. There were few men he'd feared, fewer he respected with the same depth. His father had been both. He picked up the pen again, as if the silence had invited more truth. I remember the first time you told me power wasn't about size. I thought you were wrong. I was the biggest kid on the block. No one could tell me otherwise. But then I saw how you handled Mom's silence when money was tight, how you worked nights and coached days, and still kept your voice low when Mima was around. Out of respect, not fear. That's power, you said. Restraint. I've had to hold back more than I ever thought I would. Not on the court life. I've paid people's bills, cleared criminal records, walked into homes where kids didn't know who I was, and didn't need to. I just fixed the leak, or replaced the heater. They don't remember my name. That's fine. But Delaney, she remembers something I don't. He stopped writing. His heart raced. He hadn't meant to say that last part, but it was true. It had been gnawing at the edge of his memory. That sense, when she looked at him like she already knew him, not from the news or a jersey, from somewhere unspoken, somewhere shared, a moment too deep for words, buried like a scar under years of forgetting. There's a picture of her in the file. I can't place it, but I feel like I've seen those eyes before. Not on TV. In person. In trouble. He set the pen down and stared at the paper. Outside, a child laughed, the sound echoing faint through the window, a reminder the world kept spinning, even as he paused inside his own thoughts. He rose and walked to the window, watching Mira and Shani return from the market. Shani was carrying a bag of apples, Mira holding a paintbrush and waving it like a sword. Their laughter pierced the storm. He smiled faintly, but it faded as quickly as it came. They didn't know what was in the file drawer. They didn't know he couldn't sleep through the night anymore without thinking of Delaney, and what else her silence might mean. He returned to the desk, hand trembling slightly as he picked up the pen once more. I've spent my life fixing things money can reach. But this isn't about money. This is about memory, regret, and something I might have missed years ago. I can't shake the feeling that I failed someone, and now fate's asking me to try again. But I don't know how, not this time. I don't even know if she wants my help. Maybe she's hiding from the same past I'm trying to dig up, but I can't ignore it anymore. Something happened. I was there. I didn't see it then, but I do now. Or at least, I want to. The ink smudged as his hand moved down the page. The storm had passed. The sky brightened into a dull gray, and the clock ticked louder now, filling the room with the rhythm of time passing. He didn't know if he would send the letter. There was no address, no mailbox that could receive words meant for the dead. But he folded the page gently, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it between the pages of the old notebook. It wasn't about mailing it. It was about saying it. That evening, he walked the long trail behind the house, one he hadn't taken in months. The trail led to a small wooden bench beneath an oak tree, his quiet place where he used to sit and think before life got too loud again. He brought the notebook with him. He sat in the fading light, opened the pages, and read the letter aloud. His voice cracked once, just once. Then he closed it. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. But when he stood to leave, he left the letter on the bench, anchored beneath a small rock. Maybe someone would find it one day. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer inside him, pressing against his ribs like a weight. Back at the house, he found Mara on the couch, reading. Shawnee was folding laundry. Normal life waited, steady, and unburdened. He joined them, smiling quietly. But something inside him had shifted. Not broken, just moved. And somewhere in a pew across town, Delaney Cross opened a blank notebook of her own and began writing, her hand shaking, her eyes wet, unaware that across town, the man who once towered over stadiums had just handed his soul to the past. Unaware that their stories were no longer separate. Unaware that the letter he never meant to send had already been received in spirit. The morning air was sticky with humidity when Shaq pulled up outside Delaney Cross's apartment complex in Winter Haven. The building's brick facade looked weathered, windows streaked with rain residue, as though the structure itself had seen better days. He parked a few units down, lights off, and watched the entrance. A rusted gate hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze that carried the distant hum of traffic and lawnmowers. He had told no one he was coming. Shawnee was busy with Mamera's latest art project, and he needed to see Delaney for himself before anyone else did. The file in his safe emblemed her crisis. The voicemail in his pocket sealed it. You shouldn't have done that. Those 8 words had come like a flash of lightning against an otherwise calm sky. They meant danger, and he wasn't afraid anymore. He was furious. He stepped out of the car, muscles taut, every sense sharpened. The apartment below him was number 7B, confirmed by the PI's report. He eased through the gate, unwilling to draw attention. The lobby was silent and dimly lit, the air heavy with mildew. Shaq pressed the call button. No answer. He tried the knob. It swung open without resistance. He paused in the entryway, breathing shallowly. The apartment was dark even though curtains hung askew in the windows. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his oversized boots. The place was sparse. A small couch faced a TV with no stand. The screen itself dark. A single end table was scattered with keys. A pair of reading glasses. A pen. A note was stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Be back soon. But there was no sign of Delaney. No coffee mug. No coat by the door. Just silence. Dust. If someone had fled, they hadn't packed. If she'd run, she left in a hurry. Or worse, someone emptied her out. He reached for his phone. The text he typed to his PI. Apartment is empty. No one here. His head spun with questions. Why would she leave a final note? Be back soon. Who assures people they'll come right back right before disappearing? It felt like a script, rehearsed, staged. He stepped outside. The parking area was deserted. The grass along the sidewalk was overgrown, unkempt. He scanned each window, each car. No sign of Delaney. A dry heat, mixed with rising dread. He wondered, did she pack a bag, put anything into a trunk, exit through the alley at the back? He never saw her walk out of the gate. He'd been watching, waiting. He slid back into his car and opened the PI's previous report. There had been no mention of a boyfriend or roommate. No phone calls from banks or hospitals. No musician schedule. No lecture tour. She was alone. Then the voicemail came again. He pressed play. You shouldn't have done that. No context. No fear. No name. Just a statement heavy with threat. His jaw tightened. He thought back to those men in suits at the church. The note. The waiting. The watchfulness. He wished he had confronted them then. But he waited. He sent the voicemail file and audio clip to his PI, asking him to trace the number. Unlisted. No registration. Probably VoIP burner phone. He started the engine, pulling from the spot. He looked over the apartment complex as he left, sweat beading on his forehead. He hadn't spoken to Delaney since the park. He imagined the empty couch and that absurd note. He pictured her turning on the stove to cook breakfast, glancing outside the window, and suddenly stepping out, disappearing into the void. Her absence burned louder than any presence. He drove back to Cedar Grove in silence, his mind cycling through what this meant. Disappearances were rare in his world, especially ones that happened under the radar. He pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, eyes fixed on the stains on the garage door. Inside, Shawnee was folding laundry, Mara painting toenails bright teal. He walked in quietly, setting the door to close behind him. He cleared his throat as they looked up. I checked on Delaney, he said softly. Shawnee tensed. Her place was empty. She left a note. He described it. Her brow furrowed. The voicemail. It's serious. Shawnee walked over and put an arm around him. Nemara leaned in. Is she safe? Mara asked, voice small. Shawnee shook her head. We don't know. They sat at the kitchen table. Shaq described the empty apartment, the note, the voicemail. He sent Shawnee the audio. She listened. Her face hardened. We'll do what we have to, she said. He nodded, thankful. That night he lay in the dark with a ceiling fan whirling overhead. Part of him thought he'd been sent here to protect. Another part wondered if he wasn't just the latest in a long line of protectors she didn't want. The voicemail sounded like an accusation. Accusation of kindness. But he refused to let that stop him. He thought of his father again. Restraint is power, his words echoing in Shaq's mind. He vowed he would not let restraint paralyze him this time. Early next morning, he visited Sunrise Loans. The clerk recognized him from countless visits and nodded. Shaq asked for any CCTV from the hallway or building entrance. Nothing, no records, no clear images. He pressed the timestamp 3 a.m. The only thing captured was darkness. No one, no footprints. He left without comment. He needed to find Delaney. He returned home, where Shawnee was waiting. They devised a plan. Contact the PI's progress. Arrange surveillance. But Shaq's mind kept drifting to the note. You shouldn't have done that, not just pay off her debt. Something else in his act unsettled. Someone. No, not someone. Many someone. By mid-morning, the PI called. He'd traced the number to a server farm overseas. No help yet. He also found unregistered cameras on the same complex, outside the rear entrance, but no footage available. Someone had disabled them. The PI suggested planting a tracker at her usual spots. The church, the park bench. Shaq agreed. They left home in separate cars. Shawnee took Miarara to an art fair. Shaq headed to the church. He parked 2 blocks away and walked briskly. He arrived in time to see Delaney's sketchbook left on the bench, under the magnolia tree. But again, no sign of her. He picked it up, cover only. No pages inside. Clean. Either left deliberately or emptied in haste. He opened his phone to a new message from Delaney. A single line. Meet me at Lake Point Pavilion. Noon. No details. No instructions. A place Shaq hadn't heard of, but he knew it was deliberate. He pocketed the phone. Decided to go. Alone. He spent the next hour watching cafe windows, side streets, parking spots. He felt the tension build, like the crescendo of a symphony. His mind raced. How many players were in this game? Delaney, the agency, the corporate suits, mysterious threats, himself, and whatever it was she'd discovered. He hadn't. But he left Cedar Grove at 11:45. The drive to Lake Point Pavilion took him through a maze of waterways and low bridges, the late morning sun reflecting off canals. The pavilion looked deserted when he arrived. He parked, approached cautiously. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the wooden hall echoed footsteps. The place was large, underused, chairs stacked, tables folded. He walked to the center. His phone buzzed again. Did you bring the file? It was Delaney. Only, he didn't have it. He had left it by mistake. He looked around. No one visible. He typed back. No, I have the voicemail. He moved deeper into the hall, each step echoing. Then he heard wheels on concrete. His PI friend rolled in. He shook off the grin. Thought you'd want backup. Shaq nodded. Let's wait. They stood together in silence for 15 minutes. Then the doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Delaney stepped in. She looked different. Her coat layered over a hoodie, hair pulled back. She was still, warily scanning the room. Her eyes landed on Shaq. She took a breath and walked toward him. He watched her, half relief, half guilt. No threats had been made. No cameras. No signs of violence. No evidence. Just her. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world stood still. He sensed questions behind her eyes. Did you follow me? Why aren't you afraid? Are you part of whatever's hunting me? He swallowed. I came, he said simply. She nodded, approaching. She extended her hand, almost casual, but deliberate. He took it. Let's walk, she said, voice quiet. They walked together out of the pavilion, into the brightness of noon sun. Shaq followed in a conversation. Neither of them spoke. Both of them desperately trying to start. And as they stepped toward the unknown, he realized this wasn't just a crisis. This was an invitation, a plea, a reckoning. He would answer it, with everything he had. A week had passed since the meeting at Lake Point Pavilion. But Delaney remained absent from public view. Shaq committed himself to investigating her past, determined to uncover why she recognized pain in his eyes, and why she trusted him despite it all. He started at Cedar Grove's local library, an aging building with creaking shelves and dusty state archives. Shaq wasn't used to detective work, but he was relentless. He dug through microfilm reels of newspapers dated back nearly 2 decades. When he found what he was looking for, he realized why the name Delaney Cross had lingered in the edges of his conscience without form. The clipping he discovered was yellowed at the edges. The ink faded. Homegrown hero, or innocent victim. Headed the story of a local community leader, accused of orchestrating a protest that turned chaotic during Shaq's rookie season, in Miami. He squinted at the grainy photo of a young woman, with earnest eyes. Eyes exactly like Delaney's. He remembered the televised frenzy. Crime, accusation, sensational coverage. He remembered intervening himself. Not on a court, but on the street. He had walked through the demonstration, and asked the cameras to hold their questions. He had taken a microphone, his voice booming in spite of reporters. "We're here for justice, not headlines," he had said, stepping between a young woman and aggressive reporters. The guardsmen mistook her for someone else. She was taken away. Shaq had raised her name that day. Let her speak. The media had stopped. In that moment, he saved her dignity. He stared at the clipping, remembering every detail. The fluorescent lights of the plaza, the echo of his footsteps as he walked deliberately into the crowd, the soft ring of distant sirens. He hadn't realized his act was specifically about her. He thought he was stepping in generally. Now he saw the clarity, the face in the grainy image. The girl whose protest sign read, "Injustice hurts all of us." She hadn't spoken a word on camera, but he had magnified her silence. He traced the name at the bottom of the clipping. Delaney Cross, community organizer. His breath caught. That was her cause, her conviction. This was her origin story. She had never forgotten him. He finally understood the weight in her gaze that day in the park. The recognition that shook her guard. It wasn't memory of kindness. It was memory of solidarity. He tore out the microfilm page and hurried home. The sky had darkened with late afternoon clouds by the time he erased the tape from the projector's speaker. Watching the grainy footage, he relived the moment. The roar of the reporters, the amazed silence that fell, the collective involuntary hand on the microphone at his hip. Then he remembered her voice, quiet but unwavering, when she said thank you. Just 2 words, urgent and precise enough to break something in him. He lost track of time. When Shawnee called him for dinner, he was still sitting in the living room. The TV paused on black and white stills. She sat beside him carefully, sensing his focus. Mira brought him tea. He sipped it slowly, his eyes narrowed. Shawnee asked what he'd found. He handed over the clipping. "Her story started here," he said softly. She skimmed it, eyes widening. "You did that," she whispered. He nodded, voice quiet, "And I never knew her name." Dinner moved forward with measured calm. Yet, under the surface, something had shifted. Shawnee watched him, wondering what memories stirred under that clipped newspaper headline. He ate slowly. When the plates were cleared, he excused himself and returned to the study, tucked the clipping safely into the back of his notebook, and began drafting a letter to Delaney. Not a letter of apology, but one of recognition. He recalled the plaza that day, and wrote, "You spoke truth without sound. I gave it space when others would have drowned it." He spent the next morning retracing that day's events, visiting the plaza, speaking to old journalists, reviewing footage online. The result was clarity. Her protest had brought wrong charges, though the police later admitted the real instigator was a provocateur, unrelated to the peaceful movement. She had been cleared, but only after weeks of vilification. She had lost her store funding, lost community work, lost her voice in mainstream coverage. His intervention had spared her exposure, but not the aftermath. She remained in shadow, rebuilding quietly, alone. Late that afternoon, Shaq found himself back at Sunrise Loans. He handed the clipped article to the clerk. "She's safe now," he said. The clerk studied it, then pushed a bound folder onto the desk. Internal records, clearing of name, closure of protest case. Hidden notes suggested threats had come later from unknown agitators. Shaq recognized the pattern behind Delaney's current threats. He realized the undervalued cost she had borne for speaking truth against power. When he returned home, he told Delaney what he'd learned. She listened in his softly lit study, under deep teal walls lined with books and sketches. Her expression shifted from guarded to vulnerable. She had known darkness entered her life years ago. She had learned to fight it alone. Now he offered her a companion. No rescue, just solidarity. That evening they stood side by side on the same plaza. He raised his microphone again, but only to state her truth. This is Delaney Cross. She spoke courageously. This is the same strength that brought us here today. She spoke then clear, resonant words about accountability, gratitude, and the danger that still lingered in silence. Cameras rolled once more, but this time, the words were hers. The decision to speak her name was hers, and Shaq was there not as hero, but as witness, humble, present, unwavering. That night, Delaney thanked him quietly. As they walked through the deserted city streets, she said, "I needed someone to stand beside me, not above me." Shaq squeezed her hand gently. He realized that day, he had finally paid a debt owed, not of money, but of justice remembered. Recognition returned, and dignity restored. And as they parted ways near Cedar Grove's edge, he felt a responsibility neither dollars nor fame could ever absolve, but only shared memory could redeem. Heat radiated from the asphalt as Shaq's car pulled into the parking lot of Sunrise Loans shortly after dawn. This building, once merely a drop-off point for his quiet acts, had become the battleground of buried truths, and today it would crack open. He parked, eyes narrowed, gathering resolve. He had made another call the night before to Sylvia Ramos, a veteran bankruptcy counselor turned watchdog. She'd promised help. Now he walked through that faded lobby, footprints loud against the linoleum floor toward the private office suite. A tall glass door barred entry. Mr. Clive Barnett, Executive Vice President. He pushed inside. Air-conditioned chill seized him. Regardless of Florida's heat, Barnett sat behind a heavy walnut desk, morning sun glinting off his polished head. His crisp shirt and steel-framed glasses made him look every inch the banker he claimed to be. But Shaq sensed what lay beneath. Secrets coiled in tight, deliberate curves. Barnett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. O'Neal," Barnett said, voice controlled. "To what do I owe this early visit?" Shaq stepped in, closing the door with steady hands. "I need full transparency on client account 462992 for Delaney Cross," he said. Barnett's smile flickered. "Privacy laws," he began, but Shaq interrupted. "I paid her debt," Shaq said softly. "But I need to know why it had grown again, after it was closed." Barnett's lips tightened. He leaned back, meticulously folding his hands. Outside the office, distant murmurs of receptionists sorting mail became a thin soundtrack to confrontation. Barnett fiddled with his pen. Encroachment, administrative fees, missed filing, standard procedure. The words slid off his tongue, practiced and empty. Shaq studied him in silence. His presence demanded more honesty than Barnett could muster beneath that veneer. Finally, he nodded. "Show me the internal ledger." Barnett inhaled slowly, as if accepting a prize he hadn't wanted to win. He reached into a drawer, produced a slim black binder stamped Internal Audit. He placed it before Shaq. Shaq flipped through pages, rows of names, dates, dollar amounts. It looked normal, until his eyes locked onto entries highlighted in red. Closed June 2021, followed by reopened October 2024. Fees $47,500. There were dozens of similar lines, all marked reopened, after being closed for more than a year. Delaney's entry had a margin note in faint pencil. "Hold. Refer to corporate." No one official signed it. The handwriting didn't match Barnett's neat cursive. Shaq's gaze lifted. "What does refer to corporate imply?" Shaq asked. He closed the binder slowly, meeting Barnett's eyes. Barnett blinked, swallowed. "It's protocol. We refer high-risk cases, large sums to corporate compliance." Shaq smelled the lie. "Whose protocol? And what happened after the referral?" Barnett's posture stiffened. I don't know," he said. "It disappears in Hoover's files." His voice cracked on the last word, exposing unease. Hoover, as in corporate compliance officer who never answered questions. Silence traveled the 10-foot distance between them, filling the space with consequence. Shaq exhaled, pinched the bridge of his nose. "I will see those files." Barnett's gaze fell away. "I can't, exclusive clearance. Corporate only." Shaq stood. "I'll find another way." On his way out he paused. "If your silence keeps Delaney unsafe, it'll be on you." The door closed behind him, with a definitive click. Outside, the humidity stung his lungs. He knew how bureaucracy worked. Layers of accountability, deflect, Deny, repeat, until nothing remained of the truth. He walked toward his car, mind assembling pieces. He needed more. He needed legal aid. At the community center next door, he found Sylvia Ramos waiting. She met his gaze, unmasked urgency flickering in her eyes. They talked quietly in her office, Sylvia's resume lining the walls. Awarded counselor, consumer rights advocate, relentless skeptic. She confirmed his suspicions. Barnett covered systemic abuse targeting any client with big enough vulnerability or corporate leverage. She showed him correspondence she'd intercepted through whistleblower contacts. Instructions from Hoover to jettison certain debt closures and reopen them with punitive fees attached. Barnett hadn't just pocketed money. He'd orchestrated profitable blackmail, using debt as leverage. Some clients were forced to settle. Others vanished. Delaney had survived, but only just. She'd paid with her career. The new debt was their leverage for a larger plan. The implications hit Shaq. Delaney was considered useful, vulnerable, still alive. Armed with this, he reached out overnight to a well-known civil rights attorney, Jordan McAllister. Shaq had never met him, but McAllister's reputation preceded him. Fierce, methodical, unshakable. McAllister called back pre-dawn. His voice was crisp. "I've been watching this. You did the right thing. We build a lawsuit. We go public. We protect Delaney." Shaq exhaled again. Relief. The first safe breath in days. Jordan met Shaq mid-morning at a dusty conference room in downtown Tampa. He wore no tie but held a presence that commands silence, like a coiled spring. Shaq handed him Sylvia's files, the binder, the whistleblower emails. Jordan scanned each page, eyes sharp as flint. "This is gold," he said, "but we need testimony, from Delaney, and whoever else was targeted. Breadcrumbs." Shaq nodded. "She's not ready yet, but she will be. She's wary of everything, including risks to others." Jordan looked at him. "Then you protect the risks. First step, a restraining order on Barnett and Hoover. Next, subpoena protocols and media control. We build momentum." Shaq felt a shift, the gears of justice turning, glimmering potential behind the process. His role was still shadowed, protective. He looked out the window at the city stretching beneath mid-morning sun. This was real. The story would come to light. Jordan paused, turned to Shaq. "You sure you want to go public? Once we begin, it's a line drawn." Shaq thought of his family. Delaney hiding in safe houses, his wife and daughter standing nearby but aside. Life had to continue. He nodded. Yes, and no more waiting. Within the next week, filings were submitted. The court responded with a temporary injunction, freezing debts. Media outlets picked up the whispered leaks. By the time Barnett received a subpoena, his carefully curated image shattered. Hoover skipped town. The toll was immediate. Sunrise loans faced regulators' scrutiny. Corporate execs canceled bonuses. Community activists held candlelit vigils, not of protest, but of promise. Delaney watched from the side, her face calm but resolute. Shaq stood at her side, not overshadowing her, but not invisible. At the courthouse steps, Jordan spoke of accountability. Barnett avoided him. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered. But what lingered was dignity. A woman's earned, public reclaiming of her name. And a gentle giant standing beside, steady. After the session, Barnett stepped forward, face drained. He looked at Shaq and Delaney. He held out a trembling apology. 2 words, thick with regret. "I'm sorry." Shaq watched the moment pass like a shadow through light. Delaney accepted Barnett's words, not so much for him, but for their community's healing. The next day, Shaq received a letter from Hoover, undyed apology and resignation. It closed, "May this end be a beginning." Shaq folded it, placed it in his notebook. Then he called Delaney. She answered with a soft, firm voice. He invited her to Cedar Grove for their community day. She agreed. That evening, under string lights at the center's picnic tables, Delaney spoke to neighbors, her voice steady, her story clear. Shaq stood behind her, not as hero, but as witness. No applause followed her words, but gratitude did. Quiet hugs, nods, tears, resolve. Everyone felt power shift from hidden debts to disclosed truths. And in that light, Shaq understood. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes justice was the hush after truth spoke. And when it did, even giants stepped aside. The gravel crunched beneath Shaq's tires as he pulled into the driveway of the secluded lake house just before dusk. Tall pines stood sentinel around the aging structure, their needles carpeting the ground like a silent audience. He remembered the directions from his PI. No signs, no paraphernalia, just down the path by the dock. He parked and stepped out, the humid air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine resin. He held his breath, a ritual before confronting truth. Inside, the lake house was dim, lanterns casting gentle pools of light across knotty pine floors, and battered furniture. A single candle flickered in the living room. No music, no background hum, just the quiet rhythm of night settling outside. Shaq closed the creaking door behind him, and the smell of burning tea leaves met him, comforting and deliberate. Delaney Cross sat on the far side of a weathered rug, legs folded beneath her, back to the glowing lake visible through the sliding glass doors. She looked up at him as he entered. Her eyes, once vibrant with restrained confidence, were now rimmed red, vulnerable behind a shield of wary composure. She didn't stand. She didn't greet him. She simply waited, offering everything and nothing at once. Shaq approached slowly, mindful of the silence. He sat on a battered couch opposite her, keeping distance to respect her space. The room felt as if it held its breath. Delaney's voice came first. "You found me." No accusation, just fact. Shaq nodded, feeling the weight of her solitude pressing against him. "I'm here," he said gently. "I want to understand." She looked down at the rug, hands tucked within her sleeves. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I disappeared because I had to." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "My debt, the one you paid off, it wasn't real. It was manufactured. A weapon." Shaq waited, studying her profile against the pale lake beyond. She continued. "I used to work for a tech startup, Clean Energy Research. We uncovered fraud in their grant reporting, millions in federal aid unaccounted for. We were going public, but they moved first. Executives funneled money, manipulated audits. I spoke to a federal investigator. That's when things turned." She closed her eyes. Calls came. I thought I could ignore them. Then the loan notice arrived. Then Sunrise Loans reopened my account with a fabricated $320,000 debt. They said I didn't notice a penalty clause. But that's not how it works. It was too neat, too convenient. They wanted to stop me. Shaq's stomach tightened. "You were the lead witness." She nodded. "From the beginning. I knew they'd do something. I never thought it'd be that." She gestured around the room. "I had to flee. The threats got worse." He leaned forward, the voicemail, the one that said I shouldn't have done that. She swallowed hard. "That wasn't meant for me. It was meant for both of us. You paying off the debt forced their hand. They said they'd pressure you, make you regret your involvement." Shaq exhaled. His voice was low. "They used debt as threat, but they didn't control the narrative." Delaney gave a bitter smile. "You made them lose control." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim folder. Investigation notes, copies of internal emails, showing the company knew the grant was false, text messages from executives referencing quieting her voice. She slid it across to him. The candlelight glinted off the metal clasps. Shaq lifted the papers, scanning quickly. "This is solid." She met his gaze. "But it's not just about proving the crime. It's about surviving the fallout. And right now, I'm not safe." He looked away, toward the lake, where ripples shimmered in twilight. "We'll get you safe. And we'll expose them." She looked at the documents again. "This involves people you endorsed. The startup's ad campaign used your image. You were their symbol of integrity. If this goes public, your name will surface." Shaq closed the folder gently. "Truth isn't betrayal. I stood by what's right. If they used me, they'll face the consequence too." Delaney hesitated. Then her voice cracked. "I didn't tell you everything. The fraud, it goes deeper. They bribed local officials, planning to sink another federal grant into a sham project. Everything built on falsehood. I saw contracts with your sponsorship in the marketing materials. They even used your image in internal memos, like an insurance policy." Shaq's jaw tightened. That explained the internal pushback, the Hoover files. He felt anger and guilt intertwine. "So I'm collateral? They thought silence from me would deter action." She nodded. "They needed your silence as much as mine." Her head dropped. "I'm frightened, Shaq. And I know your family is out there. I didn't want to bring that to them." Shaq rose slowly. He moved to stand by the sliding doors, looking out at the lake, reflecting purple dusk. He felt a storm inside, a whirl of emotion, but calm settled into him, purposeful and sure. He turned back to Delaney. You're not alone in this. We'll protect your family, my family, everyone who believes in what's right. She took a shaky breath. Why stay? You could walk away. Smooth it all over. He returned to the couch. Because truth matters. It matters more than brand deals or quiet exits. And because sometimes truth needs a giant behind it. Her shoulders relaxed, tentative, tears welled, and she didn't fight them. Thank you. Her voice was a whisper. They talked then, late into the night. Plans were laid, safe relocation, digital leaks, involvement of Jordan McAllister's legal team, steps to protect families. Each plan marked a line between fear and resolve. Shaq's presence was steady, calming and reciprocal, protective, but equal. Before he left, he stepped outside. The lake shimmered with moonlight. Crickets chorused from the reeds. He breathed deeply. He thought of Mara and Shani, waiting for his return. He felt the responsibility more sharply than ever. Justice wasn't optional. Inside, Delaney was packing her bag for relocation. She looked up. Her eyes were steady. I owe you more than I can ever repay. He shook his head. You already did. You reminded me that redemption isn't earned with checks. It's earned with courage. They parted with a quiet nod. No dramatics. It was enough. He drove back along the forested road. Headlights rustling pines. He thought of hidden debts, silenced voices, and the coming reckoning. He felt the weight of the night heavier now, but not crushing. Because someone had finally spoken, and justice had found its ally. And that night, reflection rippled across the lake, as if confirming a promise that truth, once released in darkness, would never be silent again. The sun rose high over Cedar Grove Community Center. That Saturday, illuminating a courtyard transformed into an open-air assembly. Rows of folding chairs lined up in neat formation, facing a raised wooden platform framed by potted ferns and string lights. A long table stood on stage, with microphones and water pitchers, prepared for speakers. Banners overhead read, Truth, Accountability, Community. No lawyers in black robes. No evidence throngs. No judge's gavel. Just neighbors, old and young, gathered to witness confession and courage. Shaq stood off to one side, behind a collared shirt and pressed slacks. No windbreaker, no jersey, no special treatment. Beside him stood Delaney, poised and determined, the folder she carried tucked neatly under her arm. Jordan McAllister and Sylvia Ramos flanked her, quiet guardians of justice. Shoni and Miara sat near front, their eyes fixed, silent but unwavering in support. Shaq's gaze swept the crowd, sensing the tension, anticipation laced with conflict, hungry for truth yet wary of its bite. He climbed onto the platform and raised a hand for silence. The rustle of neighbors settling faded into a near hush. Shaq's voice, warm and firm, rippled through the courtyard. Thank you all for being here. Today isn't about assigning blame. It's about opening our eyes. He gestured toward Delaney. This is Delaney Cross. She's one of us, but no one here knew her story until now. He nodded to Delaney. She stepped forward and exhaled. Her voice, clear and strong, carried across the assembled gathering. She told them about the fake debt, the company that used her silence as leverage, the oppressive fear she endured after shining a light on corporate fraud. She spoke of mental strain, betrayal, isolation, and the moment she decided to step into the sun. It wasn't money they wanted from me, she said. It was my voice, my reputation, my right to be heard. She paused. I'm not here to accuse Cedar Grove of anything. But our silence mattered. Because we lived comfortably. We didn't question. Her eyes scanned the crowd, nods rippling outward. We must choose. We either listen or we ignore. We can't stay silent anymore. Jordan McAllister took the microphone next. He outlined the investigation, how Barnett's forged ledger worked, Hoover's missing accountability, the company's network of suppression. He described how Sunrise Loans misused debt, targeting vulnerable customers, reopening closed cases to monetize fear. His tone was calm, factual, guided by evidence. This isn't just Delaney's story, it's a systemic failure. He invited questions. Hands rose. A middle-aged woman asked, "Why did they risk this in our town?" Jordan nodded. "Because greed isn't deterred by distance." A high school teacher asked, "What can we do?" Delaney answered, hold hearings like this and keep asking. Minutes passed like a collective exhale, grief and determination knitting together. Then Shaq asked everyone to stand and join him at the edge of the stage. He explained, "Each of us holds power, small, quiet power. It's how we live that matter." He invited community leaders to share personal realization: the grocer whose father had been wrongly docked, the school counselor who'd heard student worries about unpaid debts, but lacked tools, the retiree whose late neighbor was swindled into extra fees. Their voices threaded into one narrative: the cost of blind trust, of deferred accountability, of creds unexamined. When these accounts ended, Shaq spoke again. "This gathering isn't a trial, it's a reckoning. A chance to admit we slept when cries went unheard, and commit to waking up." He pressed his palms into the table and leaned forward. "What happens now is up to us." Silence settled like soft sand. A dozen leaders rose to pledge action. Monthly town forums, partnerships with consumer rights groups, clearinghouse for unjust cases, legal assistance volunteers, community rituals, safe spaces where voices could be heard. A choir softly sang a freedom hymn. Shawnee hugged Delaney, as tears glistened in both women's eyes. Mira clutched her father's hand. Shaq closed by saying, "This won't fix everything, but it will change something. The vast weight of silence will lighten." The crowd burst into respectful applause, slow and heartfelt. Not celebration, but recognition, an oath in sound. Quiet descended. Delaney and Jordan and Shaq walked through the crowd, embracing neighbors, shaking hands. Each greeting carried hidden gratitude, spoken words, now unshackled, recognition exchanged. He felt their weight. Every nod, every squeeze, meant something had shifted. Backstage, Shawnee held his arm. "I'm proud," she whispered. He nodded, watching Delaney talk with elderly residents. Shawnee smiled. "You gave them a stage." He smiled back, thinking of his father's lessons about restraint and power. Later, as dusk dimmed into evening, lanterns glowed softly. People lingered. The choir sang again, soft, reflective. Delaney and Shaq stood alone for a moment by a lantern. She looked at him, voice hushed. "This was more than I hoped for." He shook his head. "You made it happen." She smiled tremulously. "I couldn't have done it without you believing, without Cedar Grove listening." He nodded, looking at their clasped hands. "Listening is where we start. Trust grows from there." They walked away to join the crowd, lanterns trailing behind them, like silent witnesses. This was no ending. It was a living beginning, of accountability, of community-held vigilance, of courage born from collective voice. In that courtyard, Cedar Grove did more than hear. It chose not to look away again. And Big Shaq, once a solo act in arenas, now stood among many as catalyst and witness, gentle giant in a community reckoning by light of truth. The evening after the community gathering, Cedar Grove streetlights glowed against a deep blue sky. Shaq's house was quiet when he arrived home, the hum of chatter around the gathering still buzzing in his veins. He stepped inside, feeling the calm that followed a storm. Papers and half-empty water glasses scattered on the kitchen table, Mira's sketch supplies waiting by the window, and Shawnee folding laundry. He kissed her forehead, then moved toward his study, her warm presence settling around him like a soft cloak. He closed the door, took a seat, and opened the old notebook. After the meeting, payphones and lead sheaths had begun to blink in memory. But tonight something pressed harder. He thumbed through clippings, notes, legal memos, the debt file, Delaney's folder of proof. Each paper stirred a question he hadn't yet asked. Why had racial injustice shadowed him so long? Why had this moment returned to him so fully now? He took out a photograph tucked between pages, black and white, frayed edges. A younger Shaq in his first college game, towering over opponents. Beside him stood a man in his 50s, tall, strong-willed, with gentle eyes, his coach, mentor, and neighbor. But that wasn't who he remembered. Under the coach's gaze was another face. A young man in a crowd, one Shaq didn't recognize until now. He flipped the photo over, a note scribbled in his mother's handwriting. "Remember Kenneth's son, Kenneth." The name landed like a stone. Kenneth Walters had lived a block from their old Newark home. He'd always walked with quiet dignity, even when harassed by police over nothing. Shaq had seen him once, pinned to his car for matching description of a suspect. Shaq had followed, shouting that Ken had done nothing. It had resolved quietly, because Shaq's fame was rising. Ken died months later in a jail cell, under questionable circumstances. His son had vanished, No one asked after him. Shaq remembered helping Ken's widow, but Ken's boy slipped into silence, a name lost to grief and guilt. He stared at the photograph, mind piecing fragments across decades. Now understanding someone else's lost child had re-entered his story, not by chance. Her quiet strength, her hidden fight. It led back to this old ache, buried in default and shame. His phone buzzed. A text from the PI. DNA confirmed. Delaney Cross is Kenneth's daughter. The words felt like both closure and confession. He exhaled, heat flushing his features. This was generational. The debt had been a symbol. All she had encountered carried the weight of her father's unfinished fight against injustice. She'd inherited that burden, and tonight, Shaq realized, they were given a chance to complete it together. He closed the notebook, went upstairs, and knocked on Delaney's door. She opened it softly. No lamp on in the living room, just the glow of her phone as she scrolled. Her eyes widened when she saw him, but relaxed. He had become safe. "I need to tell you something," he began. She nodded, motioning to the couch. He sat beside her, holding the phone gently between them. "The PI's report came through," he said. "You're Kenneth Walter's daughter." Her hand flew to her mouth. No tears, just shock. He pressed the phone into her hand. The DNA confirmation screenshot stared back. She stared, went pale, then closed her eyes. He let her absorb it. After a long moment she opened her eyes again and whispered, "All this, and I never," she closed them again. "I never imagined that." He took her hand. "I remember him," he said, voice soft. "He was strong and alone. He got hurt in my first tournament, flagged by police. I tried to help, but he never got justice. His son, then a boy, got lost. I never found him." Her breath caught. "Mom never spoke of him. I asked once, and she cried." She swallowed. "She said he died in a cell. They said he swung at an officer." She clenched her jaw. "She later said he didn't, that they just needed to be rid of him." Shaq nodded, shining with remorse. "I want you to know I remember, and that I'm sorry. For not knowing, for not finding you." She closed her eyes on his shoulder. It was quiet for a long time, but the air shifted. Then she said softly, "You've given me more truth in these months than anyone else ever did." He exhaled. "I want you to have justice again, not just for your father." So we both stepped forward without that weight. She pulled away slightly to study his face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why have you done so much?" He looked at her hands. "Because I realized something important. Rightness isn't built off grand gestures. It's built in corrected mistakes. If I can help fix this, I will. Not for applause, for honor." Delaney nodded, tears brimming, but not spilling. "I want that too." They spent the rest of the night planning. Delaney would reach out to Kenneth's widow with the PI's confirmation. They'd gather testimonies, journalists, legal teams. Not for show but for closure. They'd fight for official reopening of his case, for recognition of injustice that went unspoken for decades. Later they walked to the porch, soft wind rustling oak leaves. Moonlight sparkled across the lawn. Shaq reached out and pulled her into a hug. This is our next step," he whispered. "That path," she said, head resting on his shoulder, "is the redemption my father never got." And under the moon they stood, silent, resolute. Two people tethered by fate, forging a path named not just by debts repaid, but by losses redeemed, voices restored, and a legacy reclaimed. By dawn's light, the story of Kenneth Walters would become known. But more than any headline, it was their walk toward justice. Side by side, facing a past that neither of them would leave unspoken again. What if the next untold story lives just a few blocks away, buried under debt, silence, or someone else's version of the truth? Stay curious. Ask what others overlook. Share what others stay quiet about. Because real power isn't just in knowing the truth. It's in making sure it's never hidden again.